So now we're moving into our sort of Capnote panel and closing plenary session. I can't believe I said the word closing. It seems like we just started. But it's so good to see everybody. And so thanks again for tuning in and bearing with us as we've figured out the tech as we've gone along. So this session is going to kind of go like this. We want to start, so the topic is our community development response to COVID. The COVID, of course, has been interlaced in a number of the breakout sessions, the group plenary sessions. And so now what we want to do is hear from three experts who are doing work in this field. And then we want to talk about what might our response be. Sort of a moving forward, what might we do? And so the way the session will run out is we'll start with a video clip from three student voices. One of our ideas, we have the students from the University of New Hampshire, and diversity includes age. And when you've been around for almost 25, 30 years like me, sometimes we don't connect with our younger people. So we're going to start, they each did a short segment. Total video is 7 or 8 minutes. And it's just their thoughts and reflections on what they're seeing, on what's happening, what they're hearing around the COVID. When that's done, Adam, our Mr. New Incoming President, will introduce our panelists. We'll hear from them, and then we'll actually try the breakout rooms and have some discussion, and then bring our ideas from those back using the chat feature so that we can share. So, make sense?
My name is Robbie. I'm a filmmaker and I go to UNH at Manchester. You can hear the birds chirping maybe, they're over there. Some of the neighbors' children are playing over there. It's nice outside, so I thought I'd go out. I have some questions that I'd like to answer for you guys. Let's begin. What have you been hearing from your friends regarding COVID-19? What are they talking about? Are they hopeful, worried, unconcerned? I noticed that most of my friends are being responsible, which is really nice. You know, we wear masks when we go out. You keep your 6 feet or more from people. I noticed most of my friends are worried. Not necessarily to the extent where it's unhealthy, but definitely worried. I think a big amount of our worry comes when we look to our family members who are older than us, because they're much higher risk than us. So we think about them. I know one of my friends, she lives with her grandmother. I know that was a big concern of hers. The lack of being able to spend time together. You know, school, it's once you leave school, it's kind of incredible how much time you spend together in school. When that goes away, it's very noticeable. I will say we text a lot more and we FaceTime a lot more, so that's the benefit of it. I would say that we're worried, but we're managing, and we're all going to push through it. What do you see as most important for community leaders to know about where youth are today regarding COVID-19? I would say mental health. I think that a lot of people have been struggling with the isolation, general awareness, and support community-wise. I know that my university and I, and some of my coworkers and friends and stuff, we hosted a lot of events on Zoom for students to still maintain engagement with each other while we have to be physically apart. I think it's important to remember that just because you have to be physically apart doesn't mean you have to be apart in terms of socially. I think universities hosting events is really beneficial for students. I think even into the summer, maybe they could even host events that they wouldn't typically host during a regular school year. I think that would be kind of cool. Microphone fell over. Just gonna wait for this wind. Oh gosh, those trees are swaying. Oh boy. I'm looking at this light. It's like kind of wiggling, but it's heavy, so it shouldn't move. Okay, I think we're good. So I think it would be good for universities to host events during the summer that they might not usually host. I think that could be really beneficial to students. And even, local communities, maybe they host a movie night where it's on Facebook Live, or or YouTube or Twitch or something like that. I think it's just good to maintain a community. We're gonna get through this together. Okay, question number 3. What opportunities do you see for partnering with young people to respond to the COVID-19 crisis? How can community leaders reach out, better understand, and work with youth people moving forward? I think a good way to connect with young people would be to meet them where they are. Especially now, I know people are on social media a lot, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, that one's really big. I think that if people in leadership positions put their information out where people already are, that they're gonna see it more and that their message is gonna convey better. You know, the content creators that we watch, I think, you know, that could be as simple as just looking at the demographics. You know, Google Analytics is a good tool, Google Trends. Look up a content creator that you think might be popular with a certain age demographic, and you can tell with Google demographics and their trends and stuff. It will tell you how many times something has been searched and by what group of people, you know, what age and etc. So if you know that the people that you want to communicate with are looking at this person, and that person happens to be, you know, an upstanding community member, you know, leaders could contact those people and, you know, collaborate together. That could help. Thank you. This has been 3 Questions with Robbie. I hope you all stay safe and you all stay happy, and we're gonna get through this together, and see you later. Cut.
I'm Jamie, and I'm one of the videographers for the conference, and this is my COVID response video. So I've been hearing a lot of, I've been hearing a lot of different like responses from different people. I've been hearing a lot of people who are concerned, people who are not really that worried, people who are like totally on lockdown and don't want to leave their house at all, like people who are just so scared. And then there's other people who are just going out and living life as they normally would. There are some people in my community who are at higher risk and are older, so those people have been trying to stay home as much as possible, like having other people in their family go out and do their errands for them, like getting them groceries or going to the pharmacy, all that sort of stuff. So as somebody who just graduated college, the whole COVID pandemic has been very challenging for me, but I do find myself to be very thankful for my position right now. Thankfully, like me and my entire family all still have our jobs and we're all able to work from home. But once I'm working at an internship, and once that's over, I don't have a job and I don't really know what I'm gonna do, and it's definitely made the job hunt a lot harder since places aren't open, nobody really is hiring at this time. Yeah, so I've been keeping my eye out and just trying to apply to what I can apply to, and hopefully something will come up. Something that I would want community leaders to know about the youth and my generation is that we can help and we want to help, we're able to help, and together we will get through this. So thank you so much for listening to my COVID response video, and I hope that you all stay healthy and stay safe, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of your virtual conference.
My name is Cameron Schuyler, and I'm one of the videographers that helped put together this conference. And I'm located right here in my hometown of Nashua, New Hampshire. With the coronavirus pandemic still around, many things are different, not just for organizations like this, but everywhere and everyone, especially the younger generation like me. For myself and many of my peers, it has changed how we do everything. Our education has suffered because now we have to do all of our work virtually. Our social interactions are all hindered when we can't go out and see each other and have conversations and grow stronger bonds. Our jobs and possible career startups are put on pause making it difficult to earn enough for basic necessities, and even more so, to expand our connections for our futures. We all have mixed feelings and emotions going through this crazy situation. Hopelessness, worry, dread, concern. Our communities need to know we are all in this together, no matter age, race, gender, anything. What we need most is to come together, follow the guidelines, be patient, and just hope for a cure.
Wow. A big thanks to our videographers. I heard so many things in there that that spoke to our community development work. And so I can only imagine some of the things that we could do to begin addressing some of those and to try to help as best we can. So thanks to them. So we're going to go into our panel discussion. Real quickly, before we do that, I just want to note one thing. As we heard some of the fears from our students, some of the things they mentioned that they see going on, there's a lot of discussion about how this has perhaps pushed people toward the edge, that people are struggling mentally, emotionally, physically, in so many ways. Our country is in a tremendous amount of unrest right now. We see it on the news. And I just want to take a moment, maybe, we talked about this, our board, executive board for NACDEP, that maybe we should just take a moment and just have a moment of silence, just to remember everything that's gone on, and to send up hopes, prayers, positive thoughts, whatever however you might think of that, for our nation, for unity, for the COVID problems. So let's just do that just for a minute. Thank you. There's a lot, but we are equipped, and we're here today equipping ourselves in this final session. So I am excited and energized. I'm going to turn it over to our president to introduce just briefly our three speakers. And again, they'll talk for about 10 minutes each for the next 30 minutes. And then we'll have a little exercise to think about what we might do in response. And so Adam, you ready?
I'm ready, Brian. Thank you for that moment of silence. And I think that what follows right now is fitting. And it's Community Development Extension's response to COVID-19. We have three experts who are going to discuss it some with us. They're going to give their thoughts, and then we have an opportunity to maybe have some great discussion about it. First is going to be Bo Ballou. Second would be Michelle Ely. And last but not least would be Carrie McKillop. And so I'm going to turn it over to Bo. And okay, Carrie's first. But if you want to see all the background of these three individuals and why they're so important to this discussion, please reference the program on the website. I don't want to take too much time to go through that, but thank you for joining us.
Good afternoon. My name is Carrie McKillop. I work for University of Illinois Extension, and when we began discussing this panel, like most of you, I think our brains are sort of trying to compartmentalize things, and so my default, of course, went to looking at what we're doing within Extension and within our communities as sort of that pandemic disaster framework. And so I just have a few quick slides here to talk about what we are doing, what we're thinking about, and what some of our new realities are going to be. And so to get started with, I know a lot of you, I see we have over 100 people on the call, and I know several of you are very familiar with the disaster cycle. And I think to put things in context, to put it in plain language on how community development within Extension can really compartmentalize and flow from one stage to the next, and even sort of rate ourselves on how we are doing on these different components of the disaster cycle, and including, getting ready for the disaster and making sure that response happens quickly. The response, making sure that we're taking care of ourselves and our stakeholders in the best way possible. To the recovery, which I think a lot of us are trying to begin to weed through right now. I mean, that was some of the first discussions. And then probably in the long run, the most important is mitigation. What do we do within our communities, our states, and our nation to make sure that we can mitigate this kind of disaster in the future? So in discussing this with several friends and colleagues, I said if really we had to rate ourselves, not you necessarily, but myself, I think I would have scored about an F on preparedness, simply because I think most of us have that whole context when they talk about pandemics. And when we've heard about them before, between SARS and some of the other Ebola and those kind of things, they've always been somewhere else. They haven't affected us in our own communities. And so I think we sort of looked at it as a foreign event that always happens somewhere else. And that sort of put us in kind of a complacency, I think, when in fact most of us recognize that we're all vulnerable and we should have been thinking about this. And hopefully, if that's one takeaway from our preparedness, we should be thinking about this on a greater platform than just our own homes and our own offices, but our communities as a whole. When we move on to the response, which most of us, personally, I was on vacation for a week. I came back to the office for a week and was talking to a colleague at Purdue, and she was saying, oh, well, we're working at home. And I'm like, oh, really? They haven't talked about that. And then the very next morning, I got a text from my supervisor who said, yeah, we're going into the office and getting our stuff and going home. So our response came quickly, I think. But from an internal standpoint, I think most of our universities, I know Illinois and those that I've talked to, I think we've been pretty good about doing the self-care that we need to do and creating a structure to try to figure out how to move on with our communities and our programming. And at the same time, trying to do that crisis communication and the cancellations. And I know a lot of us aren't involved in the 4-H program, but there's a lot of stress going on nationally about how to move forward into 4-H show summer and those kinds of things, and keeping those updates going, sort of that just how are we responding, how are we trying to get back to our offices, and those kind of scenarios. But when we start really thinking about where we as community development professionals really live, how do we create a recovery system that is going to let us use the tools that we know and create some new ones, especially when, most of us are not being allowed to be in groups of more than 10 or more. Community meeting and participatory planning has that kind of ties our hands a little bit. So thinking about how we can do those things that we know how to do in a different methodology. we've looked, at least within Extension and or within Illinois and even through Eden, the Extension Disaster Education Network, about how are we keeping track of what we're doing differently? How are we communicating that with our stakeholders? And how are we helping them adapt to this new reality? And in terms of our programming, what do we have that we can currently adapt? And what do we have to let kind of sit on the sidelines until we get back to our new normal? And really trying to think about how do we help create that new normal, because I think we all recognize in any disaster, nothing ever goes back to the way it was before. So thinking about what our new normal is, you know, how do we, you know, we've all become much more expert on our technologies, or at least competent, and how do we use those technologies to assist our communities, and what new ways can we create? And I have to give a shout out to my 1890 colleagues. I was on one of their meetings here a couple weeks ago, and or maybe it was last week, I don't know, we're all losing track of time, but one of the things that they're using for SARE grant, the photo voice technique, how could we use that with our young people and our seniors that have lost so much during this? And how do we document what has happened and the impact it has had on that generation, and how we can make that into a positive moving forward and getting people to connect? And then finally, mitigation. What can we put into place? How can we reduce our risks from this happening? I know we've talked on some Eden calls, making sure people have face masks in their disaster kits. Who would have thought of that? I never had any face masks in my house. Who's going to take the lead to make sure our communities are ready for things like this to happen in the future, and not to say that anybody wasn't doing what they were supposed to. I think nationally we had sort of a laissez-faire attitude towards this type of event. But also we have to be responsible and think about, like we do in any kind of disaster mitigation plan, what is that cost-benefit ratio? What is, you know, considered an acceptable amount of expense? And especially in a situation like this, when we're talking about human life, I think most of us are pretty willing to spend what it takes, but it is a consideration when we're putting things out. And then for my last slide, you know, really talking about that hot wash scenario. Most of you that have been involved in disasters know the term, where we go through what we're doing, what went well, what challenges are we still going to have that we need to address, or did we have, and how did we address those challenges at the drop of a hat. And finally, what were those aha moments, you know, when something clicked and worked well, and how do we lean into those kind of aha moments and keep momentum going? You know, for our communities, we have to help them define what their new normal is going to be. And so the lessons that we're learning and helping them garner the political will and diversity of voices to make this transition is going to be challenging. We do, however, have those tools. We have experts in economic development, in participatory planning. We have data people. How do we make those voices work with our colleagues in the other program areas of Extension to really lift up our communities and help them define that new normal and make that successful? And so I am right on time to turn it over to Michelle. And I will mute myself, and Michelle, just holler at me when you want me to.
Okay, thank you, Carrie. And thank you for advancing my slide in advance.
No
That does
problem.
take the pressure off a little bit. So hello, everybody. It's definitely a pleasure to be a part of this panel. And I just want to share some thoughts of how this particular event has impacted some of the work that we're doing, but how I'm looking at it as a practitioner in the field of community development. Next slide, please. All right. Okay, thank you, thank you. So as we well know, and I mean, it's been well documented that the coronavirus pandemic is kind of equates itself as being really a disaster for our nation. And even though it is a pandemic, when you think about the way that our federal and state had to declare an emergency, if you think about the way that this whole situation has erupted our lives and kind of has led to some of the vulnerabilities that we face, it's definitely a significant event that I feel like there's so many lessons that we can learn from. And as you know, this is an event that is not only affecting ourselves and the people that we know in our communities, but there's countless people around the world that have had some impact. And we know that also from the data and what some of the emerging points that is becoming evident is that a lot of our marginalized communities will be hardest hit. And so it gives us a moment of pause, but it also kind of points to the fact that even in some of these most extreme cases, whether it be COVID or other events that we may face, that preparedness can make the difference between life and death. And so in extension, I feel like there's so many things that we can do to kind of ramp up some of our efforts in this arena. Next slide, please. Over time, we have seen that emergency preparedness has increasingly been important as we look to some of the changing and unpredictable weather patterns. We also are dealing with new disease threats as the one with COVID. This is a responsibility, as you know, that involves every level of society. And regardless if we're working with government agencies or community residents, local businesses or health professionals, it takes all of us kind of working in cooperation with each other. In extension, we are particularly uniquely positioned to participate in this arena by the mere fact that we are deeply embedded in our local communities through our centers and offices. Also, we have the ability to customize our programming based on the unique needs that our communities face. And then also, in addition to that, we have a dedicated workforce. And within that, we have the infrastructure to kind of meet some of these emerging needs. Another thing with extension is, if you look at us as a system, we are well networked. We have a lot of working relationships with different entities and groups. And I feel that kind of helps us to leverage those relationships in a very powerful way as we try to look at what some of our local as well as some of our state preparedness initiatives need to be. It also speaks to our ability to bring the right people to the table and begin to help our communities to prepare as well as prevent and respond to different disaster events. And as you well know, with Eden, that even solidifies and builds our capacity even further to provide disaster-related resources to communities in need. Next slide. So I just want to talk a little bit, at A&T, working in emergency preparedness is a relatively new area for us. When we began to work on our strategic plan back in 2015, one thing that the plan, as you know, with any strategic plan, it kind of helps define your direction in terms of how you want to make your decisions, but it also charts out where present and future programming may need to be. And so it was then when we looked at emergency preparedness and particularly looking at our state. Of course, as you know, as a coastal state, North Carolina has a long history of dealing with natural disasters, but the data was very clear that there are groups within our communities that are particularly vulnerable during these kinds of events. And so we wanted to spend time looking at how do we build capacity among those groups to prepare and respond accordingly, but also what are ways that we can partner and collaborate with the statewide agencies or first responder groups to ensure that support is given during those times. Next slide. this slide is basically just a really quick snapshot of some of the work that we've been involved in by county staff, as well as some of the work that I've been involved in at the state level. But it really, even though I look at this, is only a drop in the bucket of what is needed. And so I just want to say that I really want to do my very best to ramp up the work that we've done and to begin to, like I say, do more programming that would meet the needs of our communities. Next slide. So I want to kind of pivot a little bit, because I feel like some of my discussion kind of boils down to who's most at risk. In my earlier comments, the relationships that extension personnel have in communities are extremely valuable. And one role that we do well, I feel, when we're working with different stakeholders or people that are considered to be the decision makers within our communities as it relates to emergency response or preparedness, is really helping them to identify local risks and vulnerabilities. In this work, I think it takes groups such as ourselves who really understand the community and can share how the community is impacted. And in addition, within Extension, we also have the capacity to make extra strides through programming and technical support, and understand that some of these hazards that we face can be reduced. So when you look at your own community, I want to say that it's important for us to begin to look at ways in which we define those that are vulnerable. Next slide. So what are some of the potential ways that practitioners can impact? In addition to looking at the risk and the vulnerabilities, it is important to look at the assets. And Carrie, I will say that these bullets come in one at a time. So the next bullet, the next, advance it one more time. Okay, so it's important to look at the assets. These assets could be public institutions, churches, places of faith, schools, child care centers, those community gatekeepers, grassroots service agencies that serve the community every day. And so I think it's important to kind of look at those assets and figure out ways that we can partner with them. Building community partnerships kind of builds on with the earlier point of how we can work with existing organized bodies who are rooted in the places where we work, and how can they help us to facilitate a culture of preparedness. Next point. And so helping communities to take preparatory action. As we understand these risks, these vulnerabilities, as we capitalize on the relationships that are there in the community, it's important that we facilitate meetings, work with the wider community to help them to prepare. And so next point, some of those things might be in the form of trainings. And some of those trainings, as you know, can go from the gamut of simulation exercises to action workshop, or even setting up a community response team. But all of those mechanisms are at our disposal, and we must allow the input of the community to kind of guide us on what those efforts need to be. Next point. And as Carrie has emphasized in her previous presentation, that of course there's a lot of things that we already know in the community development field that we can utilize to help communities rebuild. And so I would say that we bear in mind that those things are very important for us as we work with our target audience. Next slide. So just in closing, I just want to reiterate that preparedness is a shared responsibility. It does call for everyone. If those of you, maybe there might be several of you already familiar, that FEMA has outlined a process called the whole community approach. And so a lot of the comments that I raised, it builds upon that approach. And it speaks to the benefits of having that shared understanding of the community's needs and capability, working with the infrastructure that's there, as well as figuring out how we can help communities be more resilient. And so in my closing comments, these guiding questions that I have listed on my slide is kind of where I feel that we need to start, particularly if we don't have answers to these questions. And so I ask that as you think about your work, it's important for us to consider these needs that our communities face. How do we engage the wider community? How do we utilize and strengthen what's already there to create the change that we want to see? And so thank you again for this opportunity, and I turn it over to Bo, our next speaker.
Bo, you're muted. Do you want me to do the slides, or do you want to?
No, okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
I want to be Brian Raisin for a minute and say, wow, 148, 49 people on this call right now. So thank you for joining us. I see a lot of familiar names, a lot of familiar faces. So thank you. You see my face, but behind me are a bunch of people from my Purdue Extension. You can leave it up there.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
Yeah, leave it up there, but I have control of it. Okay. I have a lot of people behind me, my Purdue Extension Community Development colleagues, plus our Purdue Center for Regional Development colleagues. I have the honor of speaking on their behalf. So this is not Bo Ballou, this is Purdue Extension and Purdue Center for Regional Development that I'm going to speak about here, okay? But I want to share with you some of the things we've been able to do, and I know I will miss things. I know there's so many good things going on by our colleagues at Purdue in the state of it. And I don't have control, Susan. I don't know what happened.
Carrie's sharing her screen. If you want control, you'd have to share yours.
I just unshared, Bo. You can put yours up. Bo, you're muted.
I was using yours. Susan may be the co-host. I should be able to use yours. Okay. Try that again.
No, she would have to advance them for you still.
Okay. All right.
Which I'm glad to do, Bo.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, let me give you the context. And on average, the unemployment rate in Indiana in 2019 was about 3.3%. And we had just over 112,000 people on average per month who are unemployed. The most recent data, and I know we're about ready to get the May unemployment data, and it's probably likely to be worse than this. But as of April 2020, we had almost 246,000 people in the Indiana workforce who were unemployed, and that constitutes close to 17% unemployment rate. This is the environment in which we found ourselves in the state, and the kind of work we want to try to address with Purdue Extension. So go ahead next. So what I want to do is I want to kind of give you a sample of what Purdue's response has been to the pandemic. Again, more from the context of Extension and the Center for Regional Development that I've been part of as well. So if you go to the next slide, I went ahead and I kind of bundled these into 4 buckets. What have we done that focuses on state and local government? What have we done that helps support business and industry needs? The third thing is the regional development, because of the Purdue Center for Regional Development that I've been a part of. We did a lot of things at the regional context. And then finally, I want to talk a little about some of the data products, particularly with provided leadership by Roberto Gallardo, that I think has really been quite helpful in informing decision makers. So I want to kind of walk through each of these one by one. With regard to local government, Tamara Ogle, Larry DeBoer, several other people from Purdue Extension have really done a super job working on the local government side. Probably one of the most things I think they're honored about is they were actually asked to be part of the state coalition that's going to be focusing on recovery. And that coalition is constituted not only of a lot of state agency people, but a lot of other organizations operating at state level who are working together to really try to put together a great recovery program. What is really most interesting is that I know that Tamara brought to the table, and Tamara can tell me if I'm wrong here, introduced the Eden Recovery Workbook. So Eden has played a role in things that you never would realize, because you can bring a bunch of people together, a bunch of agencies, but how do you get them to begin to really focus on the recovery? And that Eden Recovery Workbook has been really instrumental, in our extension colleagues on that coalition have really helped guide that kind of discussion and hopefully action. On the other side of my slide there is that with the leadership, I think, of Tamara Ogle, Larry DeBoer, they put together a website that highlights all the COVID-19 related resources that local governments can access. And in addition, they were really proactive in hosting a number of webinars, 8 in all, that reached nearly 1,800 local government leaders. And now they're in the process of conducting roundtables to figure out how do we help open up local government offices? What is the right channels for doing that? How can we do this right? And again, Purdue Extension has been playing a major role in helping provide guidance. Next slide. At the state government level, I'm very proud to say that Roberto Gallardo, Melinda Grisman, and I were recently asked to serve on the Lieutenant Governor's Road to Rural Recovery Task Force. And we are now heavily engaged with 5 of the agencies that report directly to the Lieutenant Governor. We have to have a report. We thought originally in July, but as Melinda and Roberto know, we now last week were told that we need to have a report to the Lieutenant Governor on her desk by June 24th. So we are really aggressively looking at how can we look at these organizations or these agencies, how can we make sure they are doing the active recovery work and that is needed to really bring hope to rural America. The LG actually happens to oversee a lot of the agencies that are focused with a good bit of attention on rural. That's why, so we're really proud to be part of that. Next slide, please. On the business and industry side, we got a call one day from the Office of Community Rural Affairs, the deputy director of that agency, and he said, Bo, we have a lot of funding now coming through the CARES Act, and we got to figure out how can we get local communities to create a revolving loan program that allow EDA, Economic Development Administration, USDA Rural Development, other federal agencies and state agencies to invest money in a revolving loan program to help reach small businesses that really need help. So he called us up and we reached out to our colleague at Ohio State, Nancy Bowen-Elzey. Nancy's been a great part of our team. I hate to tell this to Dave Civitolo, but Nancy's become a member of the Purdue team. But anyway, we've been really working hard and we've created a hometown business preservation initiative. And we had an opening webinar, 2 weeks, 100 entities involved. We have since asked them to identify if you are really interested in going the next step, we will do a one-on-one webinar with each of these different sites. That has commenced, and we are really taking steps now to help them establish or to resurrect a revolving loan program that they may have had. And we'll do this again under the banner of the Hometown Business Preservation Initiative. In addition to that, 2 small business development centers, we have 10 of them 2 of them report directly to the Purdue Center for Regional Development. They have been really instrumental in getting word out to a lot of small businesses on those programs that have been launched by the Small Business Administration. And we have examples there: the Economic Injury Disaster Loan, the Paycheck Protection Plan, a program, whatnot. We know there've been hiccups in it, but then again, they were still out the front and trying to get that word out and providing whatever information could be of value to these small businesses with respect to those kinds of programs. If you go to the third one, under the other business and industry effort, Roberto Gallardo, just today, we actually launched the Remote Work Readiness Survey. Roberto is part of Purdue Extension and is now the new director of the Purdue Center for Regional Development. I stepped down last week. And Roberto is now leading this effort. And the intent is to look at how can we look at remote workforce as a vehicle for allowing people in more remote locations to be actively engaged in the workforce. This has been done with a number of different state agencies. And again, the intent is to look at what can we do as an institution, an extension, and Purdue Center for Regional Development to help promote and guide the growth of workforce development, a remote workforce. Utah State remote work certification that we heard about yesterday is actually part of the response. We are working with Utah State and bringing that program to Purdue. So we're really excited about that as well. The next slide, please. The Purdue Center for Regional Development happens to be the Economic Development Administration's University Center. We were recently invited to submit a proposal to carry out work that could help respond to COVID-19. These are new projects that we're going to be launching, and I'm just going to kind of go through these 5 things very quickly. First of all, we're going to take a hard look at the supply chain disruptions, what have been the gaps, and what are the opportunities. As you know, we had a lot of farmers who were dumping milk or food that could not get to people, consumers who needed it. So we're going to look at this whole supply chain issue, particularly as it relates to manufacturing and agriculture. Then we want to focus on first and second stage companies, these small to medium-sized companies. How can we introduce economic gardening program to look at where are ways to help them get back on their feet and to grow? The third thing is Roberto's work on digital inclusion. We found out, like many of you did, rural areas were really struggling. They could not only work remotely, telehealth was a problem. Kids being able to do homework and stay connected to their school. These are all major issues. So now we're actually going to implement a comprehensive digital inclusion plan, and we're going to highlight that with one region to pilot test it and then expand it to other parts of the state. Fourth thing is Annie Cruz Porter is going to be taking leadership along with Belinda Grismer on establishing regional business networks. How can we help create an opportunity for them to learn new things they need to learn to be able to get back on their feet and become stronger? But also, how can we create essentially a social capital, a set of relationships where these businesses can really help each other out, but do that in a regional context. And finally, we want to look at talent. How is COVID-19 or even a changing venue on remote workforce, how is that changing the talent across metropolitan and non-metropolitan areas or among different sectors? And this is something we're going to take a hard look at in the coming year. Finally, if you go to the next slide, Roberto Gallardo was really playing a big role in helping get good data out. I know you can't read this, but there's a couple of slides to the left. This is Roberto was tracking the number of cases per day and the number of deaths per day in Indiana. As you know, you can see some of the red line where the cases have been going down, but he's been tracking that. And then the one below that was looking at on the basis of urban rural. These were data points. So a lot of people at Purdue, including our director, Jason Henderson, was carefully tracking to find out when might we begin to open up extension offices. Again, make good decisions with good data. These are all data that came out of our Department of Health in Indiana. And the one on the right is really an intriguing thing that Roberto did, and that is it was looking at vulnerability, not a case so much of income or education, but it was looking at as remote work becomes an increasingly a part of the work environment. Do we have counties that are either have poor digital access and limited access for remote workforce? He called those high vulnerability. And then low vulnerability means they had really great digital access, broadband and whatnot, but also had a plethora, an increasing number of jobs that could be done remotely. And by the way, for those of you who are across the country, this is on the Purdue Center for Regional Development site. It's available for every county in the nation, all 3,100 plus counties. With that said, the last one is I want to give homage to my colleagues at Purdue Extension and Purdue Center for Regional Development. I pray I haven't forgotten anybody, but I assume I may have, but these are the individuals who played a big part in the comments I've shared with you today. And that is it for me.
Thank you so much, Carrie and Michelle and Bo. It's great to see that there's good work happening. We know there's more to do, but there's really some great work happening as we speak. And I'm going to turn it back over to our Master of Ceremonies, Brian Raisin, to let us know what we're going to do next.
So thanks, Adam. So what we wanted to do very quickly, does anybody just have like one burning question that they would like to ask of one of our panelists? Because we're going to move into breakout rooms, and then Charlie, our New Hampshire host, is going to finish us up after the breakouts. But is there just one quick question for one of the panelists? You can unmute and just ask it. Okay. So Charlie, why don't you take us out? And again, thanks to your team for the tremendous amount of work that put this conference together and then helped greatly to shift it online. Charlie. Who's muted? Charlie.
Well, thank you again. I'll do a retry on that one. So Brian, thank you very much. There were a lot of people that it took to make this conference an excellent conference, not the least of which is you. Had we not had your help, we wouldn't have been able to convert all the work that had been done into a virtual conference. So thank you very much. And I want to echo what Brian said, that we have some videos. It's the next best thing to being in New Hampshire, so we hope you'll stay on for those videos. You'll get at least a flavor of what it's like. And who knows, maybe down the line, we'll have you back in New Hampshire for a future conference. So this is the time in the conference when we have the opportunity to ponder the so what question. I'm going to zoom out a little bit from the discussion around the pandemic to more broad topics, because we've heard a lot of different topics throughout the conference over these past few days. And so what I really want to know is, what are you going to do with the information that we've gleaned from this conference? So I'm going to frame a few questions for you, and I want you to use the chat box to frame some of your thoughts. And Adam is going to be helping me to collect some of that information. And we don't have a lot of time, but maybe one or two of you would be willing to share some of the information that you are willing to share. So I guess the first one is more of a visual. Are you planning to try some of the ideas that you heard throughout this conference? So give me a thumbs up, or use the icon if you think you're going to be using and applying some of the information that you got from this conference. So good. I see a lot of nods and a lot of thumbs, so that's encouraging, because the purpose of this conference is to give you value so you can take back lessons learned and glean things for your own communities in your own states. So next, in the chat box, I would like you to write one particular thing that you learned or that was reinforced that you will put into practice in your work over the coming year. So use the chat box. I'll give you about a minute or two. And once we have that information inputted, we're going to copy it, obviously, hoping that one or two of you would be willing to share one particular thing that you learned or that was reinforced that you would like to put into practice in your own work, in your own state or community. So I'll give folks another few seconds, and then I'm going to invite anyone to speak out and share the one thing that they've learned. And I do have another question beyond that too.
I'll say something if that's okay.
That would be wonderful. Please do. Thank you.
Many of you probably don't know me, but my name is Jana Hunter, and I just started yesterday as a cooperative extension intern in Brunswick County on the coast of North Carolina, and I'm loving it so far. But the one thing that I mentioned was remembering that local is not a physical term, it's a relational term. So when we're talking about foods that are local to an area, we're not just talking about the foods grown there, but the foods that are a part of the culture of the people who live there. And I'll actually be working in Brunswick County with a program called Vacation Vittles. I saw someone comment providing local foods to vacationers, and that's exactly what this program does. And so I think that'll be something that I'll relay back to my office this summer and to that group, that we need to keep in mind it's not just what we grow here, but what the people who live here eat as well.
Jana, thank you very much for sharing that, and welcome aboard. Would anyone else care to share something that they learned throughout this conference? I see the comments are still coming in on the chat. So if you're willing to share, unmute yourself and jump right in. So.
I'm Ellen Rowe from Vermont. And Jenna, I'm going to retire at the end of August after 50 years with UVM Extension. And it's a wonderful job and a wonderful opportunity, and you keep learning great things, hence this conference. And ripple effect mapping is a tool I've been introduced to before and haven't really put it to use. And I got excited through this conference, and I will put it to use. I want to use it with our Master Gardener program as well as our Prosper site.
That's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that, Ellen. And we're going to definitely miss you in Extension, but as your neighboring state, I hope to still stay connected with you. And yes, a lot of us have gleaned a lot about ripple effects mapping and have used it in our states. So this is great to have opportunities to learn and hone our skills. So thank you. Any other people willing to share before I transition to the next question? So this next one is a little bit stickier. And as you may know, there's a theme that we worked hard to weave into this conference. And that theme is really about equity and inclusion. And it began with the keynote presentation by Julian Ajuman. And also there were several sessions that addressed the topic of inclusion and incorporating racial and other forms of diversity into our work. And so the question I want to ask you or pose to you is what is Extension's role in fostering equity and inclusion? And this is a little bit more of a challenging question to answer, but based on things that you learned throughout this conference, do you have some new ideas about what Extension's role is or should be for fostering equity and inclusion? So I'll use the chat box and then I'll open it up to folks to share their thoughts. Okay, it looks like we've got a lot of activity on the chat box here. Would anyone be willing to share what Extension's role could be or should be in fostering equity and inclusion? And I guess I would like to think that all of our work in Extension should have that as a core principle in how we design our work. Any thoughts to share on that?
Share real quickly, Charlie, that, and I'm going to talk about this in the real talk a little bit tomorrow, but just as we work with communities to not accept I tried, but to lead our communities through strategies to success. And I think, you know, there's been a shift in thinking, and so it's no longer okay to just say I tried. We need to, it needs to be a part of everything that we do. So yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Melinda, for sharing that. Any others?
I think, this is Michelle, I think one of the things that we might need to look at is, as we continue to provide programming in our respective communities, or whether we're working at state level, it doesn't really matter, but as we think about our stakeholder groups, just to maybe reflect on who are we traditionally working with and who are we not working with that could be an emerging audience for us. And oftentimes those emerging members of society are these groups that may have been disenfranchised at one point or underserved. And so I think it'd just be good for us to begin to listen, to first seek to understand before we're understood in the work that we do, and try to find answers to address concerns that they may be in need of. And I feel like Extension have a role to play, you know, in just ensuring, even in the traditional programs that we offer, that we have something that we can offer to those communities, but making sure first that we come to them to seek guidance and advice in terms of how we should provide programming, and how do we build those relationships and trust, and how do we have them to be co-designers in the work that we want to do. So that's my contribution.
Thank you very much, Michelle.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that point, and to Melinda's point as well, that I tried isn't good enough, that we take the extra effort and go the extra mile for all of those steps. And then another small component, and I saw that in the chat box a lot, but I just want to call it out and lift it up, is the opportunity to hold those hard conversations and have dialogue. And there are models and structures out there for doing that. I know Navigating Differences is there. That was acknowledged with an award. Also, the Coming Together for Racial Understanding work was acknowledged as well. And I'll just lift up that, you know, for most of us, we said we need to do that work internally before we open it up to communities. So taking that hard look and opportunity within our own extension systems to hold those conversations and dialogue, and then be in a better place to hold those dialogues at the community level. So I think it's the work that we do to equip ourselves to go the extra mile, and to do so in a way that is not only well-intentioned, but actually impactful.
Thank you for sharing that, Crystal. All right, before we close this session out, any final thoughts? I would just like to say that I feel that it's very important when we come to the end of a conference or a learning opportunity that we take the time to reflect. And of course, when we're in Coeur d'Alene next year, we're going to quiz you on this to see if you actually implemented that thing and made changes in your practice. So we won't actually do that, but it's important to think about that. So I want to thank all of you for taking the time, for putting some deep thought into this, and for joining us for this. And I do, again, encourage you to jump on at 3:15 to join the videos by the students. It'll give you a flavor for what it's like in New Hampshire. So Brian, do you want to close this out?
I got to find my unmute button. No, we're good. We're good. Thanks, everybody. The videos at 3:15, and then the 4 o'clock social. So again, New Hampshire, you rock.
Thank you.
See you, everybody, in like 10 minutes.